All right. So welcome to AGNR 173, Watershed Management. So we're going to do a look at all the watershed issues in the Mojave River, and we're going to look at water management in general. So you guys have your syllabus. Please check the dates, especially for the field trips by tomorrow and the workshops. There's going to be 2 workshops and a field trip. We're going to do a pretty similar field trip to what we did last year, Mrs. Pike, the 2-day field trip where you stay out at Zyzix, out at the research center at Zyzix. And so please take a look at those dates and just make sure that they work. We're going to discuss the syllabus more in detail tomorrow. Okay? All right, so without any further ado here, we're going to just go through these slides. So the very first lecture today actually comes from chapter 8 in the Sustaining the Earth textbook. So let me show you that, the 2 textbooks. So this is the one, Sustaining the Earth. That's the one we use for environmental sciences in general. Chapter 8 is copied, and it's in your Blackboard as a PDF. And then this is the book we're actually using. And I'm not sure on your status on getting these. Could you just let me know, Mrs. Pike, if you guys have been able to get these? Thumbs up if you guys have these or not. The little book, the text is called Introduction to Water in California. Yes, no? No. No, okay. All right, so maybe call me afterwards, Ms. Pike, and we'll figure out what we need to do about that, okay? I know I've been a bit slack on that. So anyway, first slide, out of Sustaining the Earth, chapter 8. Like I said, it's in Blackboard under assignments as a PDF, and we're just going to look at a global perspective first before we kind of hone in on California and then specifically on the Mojave watershed. Okay? So, as we've talked about several times already in last semester, fresh water is an irreplaceable resource. We talked about the hydrological cycle, right? Water comes off the ocean, it rises, it cools, it rains. We have a windward side, and then on the other side of mountains we have a rain shadow. And that's all driven by solar energy and gravity. Okay? That water falls and either goes into surface water in rivers and then into lakes, or it infiltrates into the ground as groundwater. And up here, the whole game is about groundwater. It's about what's going into the ground, because we get all our supplies from groundwater. We might get a flood every once in a while, or get some water in the Mojave, but our whole system here is based on our groundwater. And we're going to be looking very carefully at how that's managed. There's what's called the Mojave adjudication, a judge's order that manages how everybody gets to use that very precious resource, which is the water. As far as the world goes, we have the water haves and the water have-nots. I don't know if you recently saw in South Africa, where I'm from, in Cape Town, they've gone to mandatory rations, 15 liters a day. So that's about 3 gallons. So think of a gallon of milk. Your ration for a day is 3 gallons. Because there's just a terrible drought at the very tip of Africa. And quite frankly, I think we're going to see more of that, because I think with climate change, as it comes into play, what we'll see is climate shifting. Some places will get more water, some will get less. California is predicted to get less. And basically here in the Mojave, we're pretty much in the 5th year of a drought right now. Last year we got decent rains, but still a little bit below average. And this year, as you probably noticed, we've basically had no rain, which is extremely depressing to me as an ex-farmer boy. Okay? Sustainable development, we've been through this. We're going to look at this from a sustainable perspective. What do we need to do to have a sustainable future for people? How do we balance our environment with our social health, with our economics, so that people have a sustainable future. And so in this case, we're going to look at it specifically from this perspective of water management. How do we have enough water for people going forward? Okay, sustainability in practice. Talked about in the last classes, the 3 spheres, the ecology, the 3 E's, or 4 E's actually. The ecology, which is the environment. We need to keep that healthy and stable. And I think we all have a good feel of that. The economy, which often translates to jobs. That's a big part of the economy. We've got to make sure we stay healthy in the economy. If we destroy an economy in a certain area, well, guess what? We can't do any of the other things. And then equity, or society, the social side. How do we make sure that everyone in the world has not equal access, but an equity of access? In other words, they get some access to things like healthcare and education. And even within a community and a country, how do we make sure that that happens? Okay, so that's the perspective we're going to be looking at it from. Our talking points: the world is a mess. I think you guys, poor guys, younger people, get bombarded with this, and you've got 2 choices, really. Throw up your hands and say, I'm just going to watch more of the Olympics, which they're pretty cool, aren't they? I've been watching a lot of Olympics. Or I can do something about it. I can take responsibility. Just even in the way I live. You guys are students right now. You don't need to go out and change the world, but you can make a difference in how you live and how you teach, model for other people to live, to be responsible. Okay? We can rethink how we manage nature, people, and money. Society is in a bit of a panic. You guys might not notice this, but I notice this. Everything now, for example, on TV is climate change, right? There's a little storm, there's a little change, there's fires. All is about climate change. Well, I think we're seeing some changes in climate, I really do. How much of that is man-made and how much of that is actually just a warming trend will remain to be seen. But we can do things to help with that, so we might as well do it. There's the war of the have and the have-nots. People that don't have a lot and people who have much. For example, this is really paying out in Europe right now with the refugee crisis, right? People streaming into countries just trying to live, whether they're coming from the Sudan, or there's a huge issue now in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where people are streaming across the border into a place like Kenya. And how do those people take care of that? Because the local people are getting seriously impacted. So there's a lot of actual strife, a lot of wars going on just because some people have a life and others don't, basically. And then climate change, of course. And finding solutions. And we talk about those as sustainable practices, things we can do to help with these issues. So in this case, let's pick water conservation. Well, one of the things we can do is be better at irrigation. We're going to talk a little bit later in this. When we go to irrigate, water the crops, so we don't have to rely so much on rainfall to come from nature, we can do that more efficiently. And things like drip irrigation, right? We can learn how people, technology, practice, and principles make a difference, all right? And the big one is people. It is, and I think you guys realize already that's kind of what inspires me at this stage of my life is to make a difference for people and have people realize that they can make a difference. And this really is very important, okay? Technologies, we've got some great technology. Let's use it appropriately. Let's not use it in the wrong way. Practices, we talked about. And then the principles. What's behind all of this, right? So depending on where you come from, even in a spiritual realm, you're going to have a different way of looking. You're going to have different basic principles that you're going to be looking at. I come from very much a stewardship principle that we're supposed to, we're put here to take care of these things. We're supposed to be good stewards of it, okay? And we can make a difference, all right? So my introduction, I think you guys have probably seen this slide before. Grew up in South Africa. I was telling folks the other day, grew up like the movie The Man from Snowy River, way up in the hills. We got to play and hang out on these big areas that were rangeland for cattle. And we didn't own them. We were poor farmers, but we lived up in the mountains, in the hills. And we just were like four little bushmen, four little brothers that just basically didn't listen to anyone or did whatever we liked. And that's not always been a good thing in my life because I don't take orders really well. But it's been an amazing experience. And then I studied physiology, animal physiology, both in South Africa and then at Colorado State in the United States, and been involved with some amazing experience and some amazing science research. So the story I was telling folks yesterday, by the way, what kind of rhino are these? Whoop. Anybody tell what kind of rhinos those are?
I don't know.
Those are white rhino. You look down there, they're very hard to tell. They're much bigger than black rhinos. They're much friendlier. Black rhinos are one of the big five, so they're extremely irritable. And one of the experiments that I did that really had a big impact was, it was actually in this park. It's one of the big parks near where we live, where I grew up. But they were trying to figure out the best way to count game, right? When we put up fences, even big, wide-areaed fenced areas, we change the whole ecology. So then what we've got to do is we've got to manage the numbers there. If certain species get out of control, then man has to come in there and cull those, right? And we know that, for example, in Yellowstone right now with the wolves being too many of them, that's not happening real well. But in South Africa, it was kind of cut and dried. You measured how many animals there were, and then if necessary, you culled certain ones. So for example, at the time I was working there, the beautiful little, we call them buck, you call them antelope, called the impala, was way over doing really well. There were too many of them. So literally, they would get shot and used for meat for the local people. And we were doing research on. But to count the animals, they used to do it by helicopter. But this guy figured out, well, let's do a transect, 10 kilometers long. We're just going to cut that right through the savanna. So if you look, unfortunately, you guys can't see the slide too well, but we cut through the savanna. There's little patches of bush. So we're going to cut a straight line. So they just cleared a very short line, skinny line, just wide enough for us to walk through. And every day, college students like myself, 6 of us, and 6 Zulu game guards would walk down this transect and count the game. Problem with the idea was that the black rhino is a browser. He lives in bush, and he lives in these little pockets of bush, little forested areas in there. They're, you know, some of them are only 100 meters by 100 meters. But as the game guard told me on the first day, he said, I don't understand this stupid Mlungu because he walks, everyone knows that you walk around this bush, you don't go through it because eventually the black rhino is going to charge you. So sure enough, a couple of days into it, 3 days, we got charged by a black rhino. Luckily, they're very poor-sighted, so charged across the front of us. But the point is, it's things like that that gave me my passion. And you guys are fortunate here because you grow up in the Mojave. And I'd really encourage you to get out. It's not just a bunch of bushes. It's one of the most biodiverse semi-deserts in the world. And it's an amazing place. And so you've got a chance to experience those. Maybe not rhinos, but other animals that I think can teach us a lot. Okay, so sustainability. Quickly going over that. For sustainability work, we talk about, we don't just look at economic capital, money and buildings and people. We look at natural capital. So we look at the soil and the water. Those are all the things we get to work with. If we're going to live here, we're going to degrade that capital. So you can't see this, but this is an old growth forest here. Here's some clear cutting going on. We've cut down the whole forest. Okay? The solution is don't cut down the whole forest and destroy that whole ecosystem, but just selectively cut the big trees that we can actually use. So that's a sustainable practice, a sustainable solution. To do that, there are going to be trade-offs. We're not going to make quite as much money. It's going to take more work to selectively cut this forest. And then the last one over here on the very end says individuals matter. In other words, it's the people that count. The people need to take responsibility. The people need to understand these systems for us to be able to change them. Okay? So here's this slide. Not going to go into it much, but this is a slide of natural capital. What is natural capital? Well, it's the air, the water, the soil, the land, the biodiversity, all the bugs and animals, the non-renewable minerals like iron and sand, the renewable energy that we get from the sun, and non-renewable energy that we get from fossil fuels. That's all natural resources or natural capital. And then the services they provide. So if we just pick soil, for example, and water, well, soil is a way to purify water. It's also a way to store water, because when rainfall hits our mountains up here, it infiltrates into the soil, down into the deeper layers, and eventually makes its way out into our groundwater, into our aquifers out here. And so we get about half our supply of water naturally is basically has moved down from the mountains. And so we need to keep resupplying that up there. So we need to keep the soils and the habitats healthy up there. We get big fires, which we just had. What happens? What just happened in LA, right? They had those huge fires. Next moment, they've got those huge landslides, right? And it was awful. Behind all of that, you have to realize that that also completely destroyed all the soils up there. And now they're not going to, that water didn't infiltrate into the groundwater. It washed out over those houses and killed a lot of people, but it also destroyed that whole ecosystem. And that was because of those fires. Okay? What keeps us alive? Our existence, our lifestyle, our economy. Of course, we know a basic principle. One of the things that keeps us alive is solar energy. The sun is ultimately where all our energy comes from in a natural system. We've chosen to go out and get fossil fuels to add to that. Okay. Our ecological footprint. So again, this is all stuff that if you took the environmental science class, which you guys didn't, but AAE did, there's the thing called the ecological footprint. One way to look at this is how much land, usable land, does it take for my lifestyle, right? And so in the United States, it's about 9.7 hectares. So hectares, 2 1/5 acres. So that's going to be about 22 to 24 acres per person. If you look right here in India, you guys can't see the slide, but it's 0.8 of a hectare. So they're using just a little over an acre, acre and a half, acre and 3/4 to sustain the people in India. So we can do a lot, and it's mostly through wastage, or that it's just that we buy a lot of stuff, we use a lot of stuff, we waste a lot of stuff. And we need to employ the second environmental principle of sustainability, which is recycling. Nature naturally recycles all of its resources, right? The water, the minerals, the carbon, all gets recycled. Okay. Current environmental problems, the cause of environmental degradation, basically too many people, right? Basically, about the population of Victor Valley every day, it is still being born on Earth. And we are looking at a future where, with this exponential growth, this J-shaped curve of growth, that we potentially can't sustain all of those people. There's a thing called a carrying capacity. We know this very well from natural populations. There's a lot of food, they grow very quickly, and then they run out of food and they crash. Well, we're not prepared to do that with humans, because that crash means a lot of people are going to die. So we're trying to even that out. We would like that curve to flatten off and become more stable, not growing so fast. Well, we want to avoid these massive crashes. And we've got some potential, some things that could cause those crashes no matter how hard we try. One of them is epidemic disease, right? Pandemic diseases could cause that without us really having much that we can do about it. And strife, wars definitely cause that. Okay, principles that we need to look at in terms of how we go about doing sustainability. Well, use nature as a teacher. So we can mimic nature, not work with it, not against it, right? So the third one down is natural cycles. So we can reduce, recycle, reuse, because that's what nature does with all its resources. We are much more linear. We like to buy the latest gadget, and it's made to break, and then we throw it away, right? We can optimize science and technology. There's a lot of science and technology, simple technology. I think you guys know, and you guys visited, right? Our straw bale house. Well, straw bale building is a low-tech technology. Technology is anything man uses to make their life better, right? And so we can optimize that. We can be socially equitable and respectful and caring for other groups of people. And that's a thing that in this country, our basic constitution, amazingly enough, is set up to do that. That's why I have such great respect for our constitution, because I've seen it the other way, where people aren't all even considered equal. I'm not saying people are all treated equal in this country and that it's all perfect, not at all. But our Constitution and many people strive for that goal. And then the big one is long-term planning. You know, can we get beyond just the next stock market quarter earnings? So much of what we're doing now in the economic sphere is just to make sure your company gets that good return, that increase in their stock prices, so that they look good. And they cut a lot of corners. They'll destroy the environment or get that work done by underage people in other countries to get that done, right? And that's short-term planning, and we need to be looking at a long-term planning, okay? Groundwater and surface water are critical resources. The water table, we'll bring out our little model again. Water table is the level of the water in the sediments underneath us, right? Basically how high the water. Right outside where I'm standing here now, we're at about 50 feet, because the Mojave is just right out across from me here. If we get over into Apple Valley, where you guys are, you're at about 250 feet to where you first hit the groundwater. Okay, and that's what this game's all about locally, is we need to make sure we don't drop those levels too far. For one thing, the land subsides, and then it can't store as much water. And also, we're just going to plain run out of water, because all the water you've used today, or we're using today, ultimately comes from a well, from groundwater. Okay, surface water. And we've got unconfined aquifers and confined aquifers, so we'll get to that. Surface water is the surface runoff. We don't rely on that. And then we need to know exactly what the watershed is, right? So we're going to be talking about the Mojave watershed, but if you guys remember, basically a watershed is everywhere along the mountaintops, along the ridges and mountaintops, where water flows towards a certain central place, which normally is a river, right? That's a watershed. In Big Bear, it's very easy to see because you've got mountains and hills all around the city of Big Bear. All the water that comes towards Big Bear Lake is the Big Bear watershed. Everything goes the other way, goes south, goes into the Santa Ana watershed. Here it's a little more complicated. We actually expand our watershed to where, like Lucerne Valley has its own little watershed actually, but we include that in the Mojave watershed because we want to manage this whole area. Same thing out towards Phelan. Some of that water theoretically would go towards Palmdale, but we manage it over here because they're in our area. For example, the Mojave Water Agency's area. So certain management agencies obviously have the areas that are a little different from the watershed, but that's the basic idea. Okay. Are we using increasing amounts of the world's reliable runoff? So yes, we are. We're becoming more and more dependent on the runoff. And science, nice noise. Can you guys hear that noise? Phone, maybe?
Right?
What is that? Is it a phone or something? Anyway, so how do we use the water? Well, we use 260 liters per day. Remember, I told you South Africa now, Cape Town, is 15 liters a day. And there's some of the ways we use it. And there's so many ways we can be more responsible. Taking showers is always the one we look at. Not having leaking faucets. Low flush toilets that use less water. All really important. California's water footprint. This figure is really important. You guys have seen this before. 20% is for urban, for people, for industrial and urban. Environmental, 39%. That's everything to keep our wetlands and our lakes and basically our biodiversity happy. Agriculture uses 41%. And so in your last class, we focused a lot on that 41%, how we can do a better job of managing that. Okay, freshwater resources in the United States. We have very little rainfall in most of California because we have a cold ocean. So we don't have a lot of evaporation coming off, the winds coming off the ocean. But on the other hand, a lot of our rainfall comes in floods, extreme rainfall events, just as what happened in LA a month or so ago. That's the actual rainfall there was not unusual. We're mostly a drought area, very low, semi-desert. Everything from San Francisco down, Sacramento down, is pretty much a semi-desert. Even LA, where you're used to seeing all those pretty trees and landscapes, they just get marginally more rainfall than we do. They're still a desert. We've just chosen to transport all this water from up north. So we're either getting water they're getting their water to water those pretty landscapes, either from the Colorado River or they're getting it from above Sacramento, from the Sacramento River, right? And we're going to talk about that whole hydrological system of transported water, okay? Pollution, droughts, water hotspots are places in the United States where there's going to be conflict over water, where people are going to have conflict. We don't hear a lot about it. We have one very, very visible one locally. The folks out near the Colorado River, especially on the Mexican side, basically we had, up until a couple of years ago, been taking most of the water before they got to them. Now, under a treaty that was signed quite a long time ago, we now have to make sure a certain amount of Colorado River water makes it to Mexico, even though it isn't nearly as much as they used to get, because the Colorado River is the main supply for most of the western states, right? And we get a lot of our water from the Colorado River too. And we'll be talking about those systems. Okay? So these are these hot spots where water is really, and there's going to be a lot of conflict and a lot of discussion about water between people and agencies. So that's the San Joaquin Valley. This is us on the edge of this. Interesting enough, most of where we are, there actually isn't a conflict. Our water locally is very well managed because of that judge's order, and we're in pretty good shape. Okay? Freshwater shortage will grow, dry climates, drought. Wasteful water use is definitely a big one. And we've got, all over the world, you've got water hotspots, places in red here where water is really critical. Where I'm from in South Africa, water is really important. I grew up understanding how important water was. I celebrated, and I still do whenever it rains, and I hear the little tinkling on our metal roof. That's just like the best sound ever. Okay? How can we increase water supplies? Well, we can make sure we take better care of the groundwater we have. We can do some water planning. On our field trip, we'll be visiting the Cadiz Valley, where they're wanting to take water from that and ship it all the way to LA. It's groundwater. It's very controversial, but they're going to do that. So we can just, we can be much better managers of our groundwater. That's what that slide says. Withdrawing groundwater has some advantages. It's an easy way to get to. If you look in Africa today, the way they're solving a lot of the water issues in Africa is to drill wells, okay? But it's very useful for drinking and irrigation. It exists almost everywhere. There's almost always groundwater somewhere. It's renewable, if not overpumped or contaminated. Like I said, ours is renewed from the mountains, or we actually are putting water back in from the aqueduct. Cheaper to extract than most surface water, but it's got some disadvantages. We can get depletion, we can get subsidence or sinking of the land. Some deeper wells are non-renewable. Pollution of aquifers lasts for decades or centuries. So we're going to be visiting an aquifer out in Hinckley with the Aaron Brockovich story where PG&E polluted an aquifer in Hinckley. And basically, end story is that most of the people there have had to move, right? And so we're going to be looking at that. So once a groundwater is polluted, it's extremely hard to treat it, right? Same old principles. Much easier to prevent pollution than it is to treat it. Groundwater depletion, we'll let you look at that. One of the ways is with money, with your bill. In Apple Valley now, lots of issues with several water companies with the bill going up, how much you pay for water going up very rapidly. And the deal there is if you have to pay more if you use more. So they have a tiered system. If you use a little bit, you pay less per unit, per gallon. If you use more, you pay more, and then as you go up. So if you've got a pool and 6 kids that take 40-minute showers, then you're going to start seeing some very extreme water bills. You were hearing of people in Apple Valley that have $300 water bills. Well, that's going to change your behavior real quick. Guess what? Kids are probably going to be put on a shower a week or something, right? So, all right. Large dams and reservoirs is a great way to save our water, but they have issues. One of the issues is we've built every stream. There's only one little river, the Kauai, in central California that hasn't been dammed. Everything else has several dams on it. And basically, this is Upper California here. We're collecting that water, and it's shipped south through several aqueducts to come to Southern California for one. That's what the State Water Project is about in this area. That's bringing water from Northern California. Well, that water has been stored in reservoirs and dams, right? It controls floods. It generates electricity, which is great. I'll see you guys in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. Supply irrigation water, and it's also great for recreation, right? We love to go out to Colorado and go out on that thing. So there's some pictures. That's our local, this is the Hoover Dam out on the Colorado. Here's a little flood control on our thing. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there.